All right, so the last time that we were talking, we have just encountered the death of Patroclus. Patroclus is going to turn the tide of the war because Achilles, when he hears about his death, it is as though all of his anger, all of his resentment, all of his rage is shifted from Agamemnon and the Greek kings who have done him wrong to avenging the death of his best friend Patroclus and exacting that revenge upon Hector. He has no armor, and remember, he rebuffs the attack of the Trojans with his war shout. And so his mother intervenes. She goes to Hephaestus, the blacksmith of the gods, and he will fashion the greatest set of armor any mortal human will ever be able to receive. And as a matter of fact, in all of the mythological traditions of the Greeks and the Romans, only 3 men had ever received divine armor. Achilles, of course, whose mother is the goddess Thetis. Memnon, whose mother is the goddess Eos, or Aurora, the dawn. And of course, Aeneas, who in the Aeneid receives divine armor, whose mother is, of course, the goddess Venus. With this armor, he straps it on. And even when Agamemnon promised and offered up all these gifts, including returning Briseis, Achilles is indifferent. Instead, his vengeance is singularly pointed towards the Trojans. And late in the Iliad, in the later books, there are only 24 of them. In the late teens, early 20s, he goes out and slaughters the Trojans by the hundreds, so much so that the river Scamander, being filled with bodies and blood of the slain Trojans, began to flood and would have killed Achilles had obviously not the gods intervened, particularly Athena, who favors him. And so it comes to a point where all the Trojans retreat and withdraw to the city itself until only one Trojan is remaining, and that is Hector. Hector, who is pleaded with by his mother and father, Hecuba the queen, Priam the king, to come back inside the walls where it is safe, but he refuses to do so. And when Achilles meets him on the battlefield, Hector begins running, searching for any sort of time, any sort of way, because he knows that Achilles is the unstoppable force with the gods behind him on the battlefield. And as he runs circles all around the walls of Troy, the gods once again intervene. And again it is Athena. Athena tricks him by impersonating his brother Deiphobos. And when Hector thinks that he sees Deiphobos and calls out to Deiphobos for help, to tell him to give me some armor, give me some weapon, do something to help me, all of a sudden Deiphobos poofs, disappears into the air, leaving then Achilles standing where once Deiphobos had been. And so Achilles and Hector face off into the final battle, the denouement in some ways of the Iliad itself. And Achilles, of course, strikes him down. Achilles, the unstoppable, irresistible force of death on the battlefield. And in his dying words, Hector, however, reveals to Achilles that yes, he is dying, but that Achilles too will become victim of this war as it is fated. Still filled with rage over his friend, Achilles takes the body of Hector, straps it through his ankles with a leather strap, attaches it behind his chariot, and drags the body of Hector around the walls and particularly around the funeral pyre of Patroclus. And every single night he left the body of Hector out so that the birds and the dogs and the other animals would feed upon it, like as though it were carrion. Carrion is a word for sorts of dead bodies left out to be gotten by scavengers. And every night the gods would come down, and with their ambrosia, their food, and their nectar, their drink, they would restore the body. And once again, the cycle would be repeated. Now, in the meantime as well, the games in honor of Patroclus would carry on. A tradition in that once the dead person has been laid upon the funeral pyre, you hold games, just like in the Olympics. You have foot races, boxing matches, chariot races, discus throw, all these sorts of things, showing your prowess as an athlete and a warrior. And then finally, after the games had concluded, it is going to be Priam, overwrought with grief, wanting the return of the body of his son Hector. Aided by the god Hermes, He and he alone, an incredibly dangerous mission, is going to sneak into the Greek camps, particularly to the tent of Achilles. And inside the tent of Achilles, he, of course, has that body of Hector. And Priam pleads with Achilles to give the body of his son back to him. Now, Achilles' initial reaction would be that of to slay the king right there, on the spot. But Priam appeals to Achilles in that Achilles' own father, like he, Priam, would have wanted the body of his son. And so, overcome with this moment and emotion, he agrees. And he returns to Priam the body of his son Hector. And Priam takes the body back to the Trojan side. And both sides agree that there shall be a halt in fighting while they bury their dead. And that is where the Iliad ends. This great work that we think that is all about the Trojan War is, like I said, only a 2 or 3 week period. And so in that way, the very last line of the Iliad becomes, "Such was the burial of Hector, breaker of horses." Whenever you're a warrior, whenever you're a hero in the Homeric epic of the Iliad and the Odyssey, you very often have what is called an epithet, or several epithets, kind of these taglines that somehow reveal your character. Agamemnon is called Lord of Men. Achilles has several of them. He is swift-footed Achilles. He can track you down to the battlefield as you flee from him. He is godlike Achilles because, of course, he is favored by the gods and the like. And Hector would be Hector of the shining helm, man-slaughtering Hector. But the very last epithet used of him to describe him in his burial, in the very last line, it was Hector, the breaker of horses. Now, of course, the war will go on, and there will be more action. But the details of these things come to us from other sources. One particular is Quintus of Smyrna, a fellow who hundreds and hundreds of years after, of course, Homer in the Iliad and the Odyssey picks up the story and tells it to us. But there's so many other versions and other resources that give us all these details. But this is going to end this recording in that the Iliad finally has come to an end. And now we have post-Iliad things that we can then discuss, which will be, of course, in the next installment.